Good morning, Northside. It's good to be with you here today, whether you're joining us today in person or online. I anticipated being there in person today, but my boys and I over the last week or so have tested positive for COVID, so out of an abundance of caution, I'm going to share with you this way today. I'm excited to share with you today, though, about God's call on our life to serve. First, of course, to serve Him, and then out of the overflow of our relationship with Him, to serve others. We've been talking about how to serve God with our finances over the past few weeks, and today we get to talk about how to serve Him with our time and our energy and our gifts and abilities. The past few years have been a somewhat difficult time for serving others the way we're used to. Suddenly, rather than supporting others face-to-face, service might have meant dropping off a gift, having drive-by parades, and we all know leaving a roll of toilet paper on someone's front steps. Different, creative, but not quite the same, not quite the way we're used to serving. Connecting and supporting others when we couldn't physically be with them is just different. Actually, this past week for me, my family served me by hosting watch parties of a movie and delivering my food to my room so that I was keeping the rest of my family healthy. But slowly, I believe we are getting back to a time and a place where we can step back into supporting people and organizations again with a more physical, tangible presence. And that, to me, is so exciting. It's something that I think was a little bit lost during this time, something that I think, for me at least, I need a little more practice getting back into that habit of serving. It's something I've been missing. So to kick off our renewed commitment to serving, today we are going to spend some time talking about why we serve, and then highlight a few different ways you can join in and serve with some local organizations ministering right here in Whatcom County. So, why should I serve? Why should you serve? Why should we serve? Paul in Philippians 2, starting in verse 1, says, "Therefore, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from His love, if any common sharing in the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and of one mind. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interest, but each of you to the interests of others. In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who, being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be made to His own advantage. Rather, He made Himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. And being found in appearance as a man, He humbled Himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross." So, first of all, we are to serve because we are following Christ's example. He made Himself nothing, taking on the nature of a servant and becoming obedient to death. We will never outserve God. He made the ultimate step down to serve us and paid the ultimate price. In gratitude, Paul says our attitude should copy or emulate Jesus' attitude. I love verse 6. I'll say that one again. "Who, being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped or something to be used to His own advantage." The next verse says He emptied Himself. He emptied Himself of the benefits, the rights, the privileges of being God. He is and was entitled to our worship, but instead, we nailed Him to a cross. He didn't cling to the things He was due. He didn't grasp at them. And that word picture to me is so beautiful because I can think of many times in my life where I have grasped at what I thought I deserved, at what I felt entitled to. I felt so strongly about it that I just would not let it go because it just wasn't right. But Jesus did not grasp at those things that He actually was entitled to as God and as our King. He willingly set them aside, and He asks us to do the same, to give up those rights, those benefits, those privileges, to lay them aside and to serve. He gave us another example of serving those who really didn't deserve it when we look at the Passover supper in John 13. Passover supper was just before His death, And just like one of us might consider our words in our life, if we know we're at the end of our life, Jesus brings his children close and he whispers to them the words that are important, the words of life. And he's showing them that in this scene. So let's look at what he was showing them in that last week. John 13. It was just before the Passover festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. But the evening meal was in progress, and the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. Jesus, here at the end of his life, as he's about to make the ultimate sacrifice for humanity, even as they're plotting his death, he takes on the role of a household servant. Now, this is an overused word right now, but it's unprecedented. Society in those days didn't have the fluidity that can exist in our society today. Servants weren't doing the job because they loved working with people, or because they were really pursuing a job as an actress or getting their degree. They were doing the job because they had to do it. Whether it was a slave who couldn't leave, or someone who was a servant but didn't have any other substantial income, this was a job you didn't do unless you had to do it. But Jesus steps outside of that tradition and says, your culture, this new culture, kingdom's culture, is to be upside down in this respect. That same upside down culture is recorded in Luke 22. It's also at the Passover, but it's not about the washing of feet. But here's what is said. Luke 22, verses 24. A dispute also arose among them as to which of them was considered to be the greatest. And Jesus said to them, the kings of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those who exercise authority over them call themselves benefactors. But you are not to be like that. Instead, the greatest among you should be like the youngest, and the one who rules like the one who serves. For who is greater, the one who is at the table or the one who serves? But I am among you as one who serves. He initiated a new set of rules, a new kingdom. Our kingdom culture values serving others. But we're still here on earth, which means we still have a sinful nature. So our second point for today means our pride and selfishness make it hard to follow Christ in serving. Let's look back at verse 3 in Philippians. It says, do nothing out of selfishness or pride. Selfishness and pride were the root of why Satan was thrown out of heaven. He thought he, as creation, was better than the Creator and wanted to be like the Most High. But it's natural for us to do it too. Even in the cosmos, we have considered ourselves the main attraction. We can look back at history and we see that we used to think that the Earth was the center of the universe. Instead, we learned that we are orbiting around the sun, and that was quite a scandalous claim at the time. It just didn't sit right with our human pride that we wouldn't be the center of everything. I wonder if God did this at creation just with some humor to remind us of our place in the big picture of life. As babies, we enter the world demanding to be the center of the family. Feeding and sleeping and showers and everything else is dictated by the needs of a tiny little human. I remember watching Boss Baby with my kids when they were younger. If you haven't seen it, it's a good one. But they were old enough to know the truth of what happens when another sibling comes along. And one of my children leaned over and said, I think I know who our Boss Baby is. Everything bends to the will of a little one. Over time, however, part of parenting is helping our children to learn that life doesn't revolve around them. Siblings will also remind them of this, and classmates too. Our young egos get bruised as we realize more and more that as much as we hate it, things don't still bend to our will. And even as we know this, we still keep that desire to be on the throne and dictate to everyone else how the world should run. But again, God calls us to something radical. He calls us to be counter to that. He calls us to a kingdom culture. He calls us to follow his example. He calls us to consider the needs of others higher than our own. He calls us to serve. And he takes that first great leap down from heaven to earth. He stoops down to meet us where we're at. Serving others always comes at a cost, a sacrifice of our time, of our money. It requires laying aside the things that we want, the things that we feel like we deserve. I remember the McDonald's commercial that says, "You deserve a break today." Really? I deserve a break today? It sounds good, doesn't it? And I think it is the American way, but I don't think it's what God calls us to. And sometimes it's easy to get those two mixed up. God calls us to remember and act on, they need a break today, and I can help. We also have to not grasp onto what we think we are entitled to, what we deserve, but set it aside to see the needs of others and then to be able to help. It will be painful, the pulling of ourselves off the throne of our life, but if we want to follow Christ, he has made it clear how we can do that. And he even told us what our service should look like, who we should be serving. So point 3, we should serve everyone, but especially those who are vulnerable and who society doesn't typically look out for. James 1, verse 26 and 27 says, it talks about true religion, and it says, "Those who consider themselves religious and yet do not keep a tight rein on their tongues deceive themselves, and their religion is worthless. Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world." Widows and orphans and refugees in the Bible had no way to provide for themselves. And so God has a special place in his heart and a special way he asks us to look out for them. We go on in James 2, verses 14 through 17, and it talks about our faith leading to action. It says, "What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such a faith save him? Suppose a brother or sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to them, 'Go in peace, keep warm and well fed,' but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself is if it is not accompanied by action, is dead." In the Old Testament, as God was establishing the nation of Israel, he gave clear instructions again and again and again, and I'm going to highlight a few of them for you here, on what a community, a society, a nation that was following God should look like. And anytime that God talked about following him, almost always he linked that with the way we treat people and the way the community functions together. So a nation that was following God would look a certain way, obviously obeying him and following his laws, but then also looking out for people. So I'm going to highlight a few of them. Exodus 22, 21 through 23 says, "Do not mistreat or oppress a foreigner, as you were foreigners in Egypt. Do not take advantage of the widow or the fatherless. If you do, and they cry out to me, I will certainly hear their cry." Deuteronomy 10, 18 through 19 says, "He defends the cause of the fatherless and the widow, and loves the foreigner residing among you, giving them food and clothing. And you are to love those who are foreigners, for you yourselves, again, were foreigners in Egypt." Isaiah 1:17 says, "Learn to do right, seek justice, defend the oppressed, take up the cause of the fatherless, and plead the case of the widow." Zechariah 7, 9 through 10, "And the word of the Lord came again to Zechariah. This is what the Lord Almighty said: Administer true justice, show mercy and compassion to one another. Do not oppress the widow or the fatherless, the foreigner or the poor. Do not plot evil against each other." And then there's 2 in Psalms that also highlight this. "He is the maker of heaven and earth, the sea and everything in them. He remains faithful forever. He upholds the cause of the oppressed and gives food to the hungry. The Lord sets prisoners free. The Lord gives sight to the blind. The Lord lifts up those who are bowed down, and the Lord loves the righteous. The Lord watches over the foreigner and sustains the fatherless and the widow, but he frustrates the ways of the wicked. And last one I'm going to highlight today, Psalm 82, 3-4. Defend the weak and the fatherless. Uphold the cause of the poor and the oppressed. Rescue the weak and the needy. Deliver them from the hand of the wicked. We have, right here in Whatcom County, some amazing organizations that are reaching out and serving those who need a little extra support. Over the course of the next 5 or 6 months, we plan to have a once monthly opportunity to serve with one of these organizations as a small group from Northside, not a small group Bible study necessarily, but just a group of people from Northside who will go and tackle a project. So sometime in the next 4 weeks, we plan to send a small group like that to serve for a few hours with Whatcom refugees. And then the next month after that, we will have a similar opportunity with another of our ministry partners. And our hope is that you're able to find a place to serve that you really enjoy, where you can be meeting the needs of those who might need some extra support. So today, we're going to highlight our ministry partners, the work that they're doing, just really briefly. And then after the service, the people who speak will be around the room, and that will give you the opportunity right now, today, before you forget and life gets busy, to express interest in one of these organizations, to get a little more information. And I know that the people would love to talk with you about it too. So before we get too far along, Mickey's going to come up and she's going to bring up a few people to share, and I look forward to hearing from them.